Hi, Nimaji.
Hi Deepak, how are you?
I'm good. So nice of you to take the time for this conversation. And we hope it will be a great one given your extremely varied background and deep expertise.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure always to interact with anybody about Vedanta, and especially you because we met and I really connected with you in Anekati. So it's a pleasure to interact with you, Deepak.
Absolutely. So just as a background for listeners, I met Neema at Anaikatti during last year's New Year retreat. And her story actually resonated so much with me that I still remember it almost 1 year down the line. And hopefully she'll share that story and many others when we get started. So Neema, let's actually start with your own background, your own journey as we move. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to cover, but your own background and how you went from a corporate to actually into a deep Vedantic study.
So actually, I grew up in Bombay, and when I was 20 years old, I went to the US for my higher studies. I went for my master's degree. And, actually, I was just a typical teenager of Bombay, pretty carefree, and grew up in a relatively modern Gujarati family. So I was not really familiar with anything, connected to Indian philosophy. But I always had curiosity, and more when I went to the US. Basically, at least in those times in late 80s, one expected that US was all wonderful and life there was just fabulous, and when I actually went there. Of course, I learned a lot, and really, it was a very, very intense time for me, and a very amazingly, curious time for me. But one thing I noticed, and that was that, the way I expected Americans, it was not like that. I mean, many of them had issues, and so many of them were seeing psychologists. So that was something that kind of, really put some questions in my mind as to we glorify, the stay in the US, and we think that we've made it in life, but actually they are as much struggling. I couldn't say that Indians are not struggling, but they had the same kind of struggles. And then that kind of made me think about what are we all ultimately looking for. And I just happened to see a poster which was about Swamiji giving a talk. And I just went out of curiosity because I didn't know who he was. But what attracted me was the topic. And the topic was, who are you and what's your relationship with the universe and the cause of the universe? So I thought, who talks about something like that? Generally, even if you attend a spiritual talk, it's more like an advice, be good, do good. But nobody actually makes you think about things, for which generally we don't have answers. So I went there and, just out of curiosity. And the talk was from 9 to 4. And I thought I would just stay there for an hour or so. But what really captured me were two things. The first thing that Swamiji said is, this is not my knowledge. It's not something that I have come up with. This is the spiritual heritage of India. And, we have so many teachers who have thought about it and transmitted this knowledge. And I'm only one of the teachers. I have learned it from my own guru and I'm transmitting it. And that, I think, really attracted me because it kind of made me feel as though I didn't have to follow one person. I was here to inquire, and I was seeking answers and not, just blind following or having some kind of a belief in one person. So that attracted me. And the second thing really attracted me was the approach. So nothing he said is because Bhagavad Gita is saying this or because Vedanta is saying this, we have to believe. It was all kind of done with a lot of analysis, emphasizing inquiring, exploring, rather than prescriptive and advisory. So that I think I really loved that approach, that I was looking into things and I was exploring and I was allowed to ask as many questions as I wanted, and not to just kind of blindly swallow everything that was being said. So these
Right.
two things really hooked me on.
And usually these questions, Neema, who are you? Who am I? What is your connection? At first instance, they look too abstract to even articulate. So did you have that reaction, or were you immediately able to think that there might be something to uncover here?
So, I mean, that's an interesting question, Deepak. It was the first thing is I couldn't get up, right? Because it was engaging me. But a lot of things that he was talking about, basically his talk covered and he answered all these questions, who are you? And what is the nature of Ishvara? And what is, your connection with Ishvara? What is the nature of the universe? So it was a very comprehensive talk. But half the things were going above my head. It's not that I understood everything. But, I do remember that at the end of the talk, one thing stayed with me. And that was relationship between pot and clay. So what he was actually trying to show is something very big. Generally, you don't think about it, that, this Satya Mithya relationship. And Satya Mithya relationship, Mithya does not mean illusion. It does not mean false. It means a dependent reality. And, so pot has a dependent reality and clay has an independent reality. And that relationship somehow stayed with me. Because, I had never thought about the world like that. Because if you actually apply this relationship, then every form has a substance. And anything that you see in this world is nothing but forms within forms, within forms, within forms. And it must have a substance. And what I understood is Vedanta is trying to talk about that substance that otherwise eludes us because we cannot see. It's not an object. And this is what I think really captured me. I found it interesting because then it is not abstract. It's not like thinking about something. It's finding that which is really the basis from which all the forms emerge. So I think that I captured and that fascinated me. And that's what kept me going,
And that then started your journey back to India?
Yes. After I met Swamiji, that time only I was a student, then I was working. I was working with the United Nations in New York as an economist, and then I was transferred to Bangkok. And, I had my amazing career going because in my 20s, I, graduated and I went to the UN and I was an economist. I had a diplomatic status. So everything was going so well for me. But there was one thing that kind of really, I felt as though I had to explore a little more. Maybe I got everything that I wanted too quickly in life and it lost its glamour for me. So, but this question kind of kept, coming up again and again. So I decided in 1995 to leave my job. That time I was posted in Bangkok, leave my job and study Vedanta full time for 3.5 years. So from 95 to 98, I studied with Swami Dayananda ji and full time staying in the ashram.
Right. So a quick question on that part, Neema. So you said that there was a feeling that there is something more to uncover. Was that feeling also mixed with something like a lack of happiness or something that the happiness aspect is missing? Because something which you mentioned is something which another guest mentioned, that for people who are still in the race, it is easy to get deluded and keep on running. But for somebody who achieves it, or at least gets to the point where they wanted to get, and then they find that at the end of the rainbow, there is another rainbow starting and you just keep on running. For them, this switch is more drastic. Was there something like that happening in your mind as well?
Yeah, obviously, in addition to inquiry, it is also to do with our emotional being. That there is a certain void that we have, which nothing, no matter what, you can go to Ivy League schools, you can have the best of the jobs, but that there is some void which is not filled, even emotionally, not only cognitively. And so both together, because otherwise if it was only cognitive, one could say that oh, let me just read the books or let me listen to Swamiji's recordings and all. There are alternate ways of doing it. But when the cognitive intellectual curiosity is mixed with our emotional search, and non-fulfillment, then it becomes a little bit more, it becomes a little more urgent to fulfill. And that makes you make this decision, which was not actually an easy decision for me, to leave job and not to know what was going to come next, And so it was a big risk. It was big unknown that I was going into, but there was some conviction that I cannot, not think about these things. And that pushed me to actually make that decision, which was not easy. See, because at the same time, generally, if you're really disappointed in life and you are lost in life, then it's much easier to kind of go to Vedanta. I had many things going for me. And, still to make that decision where there were so many unknowns, there was, but there was enough conviction on my side to know that this is something which is worth it.
So what I've seen, and I would love to bounce this thought from you, is that you mentioned for people for whom life is not going well, for them it's easier to jump, but I've seen for them it's more difficult to sustain, because in many cases they are sort of running away from something, and once they go to the other side, they find the same problems, mental, cognitive, emotional, they are still there. But for people who are taking more stable, more balanced decision, it might be a difficult jump, but it's slightly easier to sustain because you're on a stable footing.
I totally agree. I see a lot of people coming to Vedanta and, to escape life, because, when life is so difficult and you don't see any way forward, and if somebody teaches you, you are the whole, you are one with Ishvara. Sounds wonderful, right? Sounds amazing that now I don't have any problem. I can just bypass my whole life and I can just kind of live with this vision of oneness and, my being, one with divinity. So sounds very attractive. But as you very rightly said, Deepak, Vedanta is not just, flying with some wonderful idea. So when you go and study, at least this is what I saw, that it is very rigorous study. Because what we had to do is to get up at 6 in the morning. There was meditation. Then there were 2 Upanishad classes. Then there were 2 Sanskrit classes. One was grammar and one was Panini grammar. And then there was Bhagavad Gita. Then there was question answer, Vedic chanting. So it's a lot and a lot of things to do. And, Sanskrit classes also had homework. So it's not, just la la land of a spiritual life where you just hang out and sing some bhajans and, think, oh, I'm the whole. So it wasn't like that. And of course, you need to have some interest. So you're right, when people were only coming because they were disenchanted with life, they found it very difficult to cope with, all the curriculum. And it was so busy all the time. And there was so much studies. And they just wanted to, a cool place to relax and unwind. But it was not like that. So you're right that, and also there is another thing, that Swamiji's style of teaching was such that he would not let us escape into this kind of a vision, because he kept emphasizing that you can't bypass the world. You can't bypass Ishvara. Ishvara's order is this universe. And in order to kind of get to the truth, you cannot bypass the world. You need to master living in this world. So that where you see the problem, that exactly you have to make it a non-problem. Why? Not because you're trying to escape it, but you have a wider vision of reality. So this is why it was never about, the way he taught Vedanta, we could not escape. We could not escape. And also, Deepak, what happens, and this is also Ishvara's order, when you are immersed in the study, anything that you have escaped, right, or bypassed in your life, it all starts coming up. It invariably starts coming up. So in fact, it's one of the hardest times. Why? Because if there are sorrows that you have not looked into, if there are fears that you have not looked into, if there are certain issues such as anger that you have not looked into, everything will surface. Everything will surface because there are no distractions. There is no, in normal life, you have friends to escape, you have movies to go to, you have theater, you have restaurants, you have so many activities, where you keep yourself busy and to avoid looking into yourself. But here there is no escape. There are only books, and we were totally removed from, you have visited Anaikatti and you've seen. And when I was visiting, it was, we didn't have computers. We, in fact, did not even have telephone lines. There was only one telephone line for this huge campus, which was located in the main office. So even to make a call, right, even to make a call to my parents was like a huge kind of an event where I had to plan 2 months in advance and to say, okay, now I have to call, and half the time even that phone wasn't working. So we were totally cut off. There was absolutely nothing. So there was no distraction. We were only with the studies and with ourselves. So that's when not only the studies were very rigorous, because you had to study Sanskrit and you had to begin to understand, Bhashyam of Adi Shankaracharya, commentaries of Adi Shankaracharya on Upanishad. So you have to reach that level. So it was very, very, and conceptually understand what Vedanta is talking about, and at the same time all your issues that you probably don't want to think about, then they start emerging and they start surfacing, and there is no escape. So it was, you're right, if you've just come to have a good time and unwind, it was not possible. It was definitely not possible at that time.
Right. And you not only have these issues coming up, you have nobody to blame. In the real life, you could have blamed 10 different people because of my boss and this and this. But now you are alone with just the text and yourself.
Absolutely. This tendency to blame, as you said, is so kind of normal for human beings. And this is why even our interactions with each other, we were 50 students, and even interactions with each other were at times very tense. There was a lot of love, there was a lot of sharing, and there was a lot of bond. But at times something can happen and it can really trigger the person, and that person can start blaming you. So I'll just give you one example. And this is something that I still remember. And she's still a good friend. But we had such a, so in Sanskrit class, so it's a tough class. So, I was concentrating, and the person who was sitting right in front of me, she was talking all the time, with her, whoever was sitting next to her. So one day, very politely, I told her that, please, can you not talk during the class, because, it disturbs me and I can't follow. She blew up. She blew up at me, and she says, what do you mean you're so arrogant? And, you are also talking in the class. I said, I'm talking in the class, but asking questions. I'm not talking with the person sitting next to me and, distracting everybody. You only think about yourself and you're like this. And she was so angry with me for just making a small request, that please don't talk in the class. So this is, it's not that, Deepak, when you go there, that tendency to blame others goes away. The human nature that we have, we carry it wherever we go, right? Unless you look at it, unless you start paying attention to it, no matter where you are, it won't go. Right? Just the fact that you're in this place doesn't ensure anything. We have to take responsibility for our life, and we have to begin to reflect, what are our shortcomings, and also not blame ourselves. It's nothing to, everybody has some shortcoming or the other. Not to feel guilty about it, but take responsibility for your life and move forward. And this is something that Swamiji was very, very emphatic about. That Vedanta is, relative individual has to be fulfilled and mature before that person becomes eligible for such a huge reality. So this is why he kept emphasizing it. And all of us, we did it at our own pace, and also people have different levels of emotional maturity, right? So he would accompany us. He would understand who has a little bit more inclination, who is a little more reflective, who has the tendency to blame everyone. He understood each one of us, and he helped us in our journey.
And were you the youngest in the class?
So,
How was the class distributed?
No, I was not the youngest in the class. By the time I knew Swamiji when I was 22 years old, but by the time I went to the course and I studied full time, I was in my late 20s. And when I finished the course, I was in my early 30s. But no, there were younger people than me. So you can imagine, there was one woman from the US. She was, when I was 29 or what, she was 22. So, significantly younger than me. And there were some boys, from different parts of India, from Orissa and all. And they were 24, 25 years old. So I'm surprised that I was not at all the youngest, but even though I was young enough, but I was definitely not the youngest.
Did you have a background in Sanskrit before joining?
Yeah, I did study. My grandparents were Sanskrit scholars. So when I was growing up, I saw them translating Ramayana from Sanskrit to Gujarati, following Anushtup meet. So I've seen, scholarship when I was growing up. But and that's why they were insisting that we had to go to a school where they would teach Sanskrit. So I went to a school which taught Sanskrit. So I did study a little bit. But, at that time, we didn't see the value of it. Always seemed like, oh my God, why do we have to study Sanskrit? What are we going to do with it? It is, not going to be of any use. We all wanted to study French and we wanted to be modern, and, but little I knew that it was really going to be such an integral part of my life. But because I didn't have that much interest, I didn't really remember anything. I had to relearn everything at the ashram.
So, Neema, let me just divide. So there was one phase where in the US, you met Swamiji, you had some sessions with him. So this was your initiation. And then you went into a deeper dive, which is 3 years. And it's a long, long time, especially devoted to one single subject. So how did you find yourself changing in those 3 years? What was you looked at upon yourself?
I think the first thing that I found myself changing in is I became a lot more authentic. Authentic human being means, sometimes it's not only we hide ourselves from others, we also hide ourselves from ourselves, So you'd like to believe that I'm like this and I'm like that. And it really humbled me many, many times to kind of not carry this kind of an image. I'll give you 2 examples, just Deepak, to make it more concrete. So, I thought I was really smart. And of course I was. I mean, I was among the top students in the class. But, there is a certain kind of arrogance that we all, I was working with the UN, I'd been to Ivy League school. So that kind of, you all carry a little this thing about you. And there was one guy in the course, and he was from Orissa, and he had hardly, I think he had just finished his BSc or whatever. And he was, Deepak, so brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. Both in Panini grammar, he was just like outstanding. And also in, the understanding of the Bhashyam. he was outstanding. So I was very vocal. I had questions, and I was relatively articulate because I studied abroad, and we know even at the UN you have to talk. So and he was not somebody who could kind of project himself or show how smart he was. But I felt that he was far more brilliant than me, and that humbled me. So that is, it's like, there are simple people with simple backgrounds, but how brilliant they are. And that was something which really humbled me and, put my, my reality at the right place and not, live in that bubble. The second thing which I also learned in a totally another direction. So there was this other guy. He was not like very smart or anything. And he was, sometimes going here and there and bunking classes. So nobody took him very seriously. And I also thought that, I was good friends with him, but I thought that he was just like hanging around, not having a good time. I mean, just having relatively just, just going along, but not really interested in learning. Then we had gone as a course to Rishikesh to study Chandogya Upanishad with Swamiji. And during this time, it was Shivratri. And so our ashram being Vedanta ashram, our celebrations stopped at 10 o'clock at night. But all the other ashrams, they have all night programs, So we were a little curious as to what's going on in other ashrams. So after our ashram program was over, we just started walking and we started visiting different ashrams. And we reached Lakshman Jhula. As we reached Lakshman Jhula, there were some lepers, people with leprosy. And they came and started touching feet of this guy who we thought was just kind of hanging around, not at all serious about studies. And we were all wondering what's going on, how do these lepers kind of, approach this guy and touch his feet and start saying, Swami, Swami, Swami. And then he very shyly told us that before he came to the course, he stayed for 1 year in Rishikesh and he served those people with leprosy. That was something I said, can I do this? Could I have done that? Right? So what is this intellectual thing that I'm carrying about myself? There are so many aspects to a human being, and from that day onwards, my perception of him changed. And my perception of myself also changed because, a human being is multifaceted. Intelligence is just one given aspect. And there are so many other aspects, that caring, that compassion, ability to serve others. And those are equally important in life, And I think these kind of experiences really changed my perception of the world, the way I see others, the way I see myself. And it made me a lot more grounded and a lot more humble and a lot more, person with certain humility and not living with a certain, this glorified image of myself.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it fascinating how easily we form judgments, both for ourselves as well as for others?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Deepak. And, I have really learned this lesson. And I'm happy that, I have that capacity to reflect and to revise myself. Even now, today, when I teach, I really don't, put up this show. I'm a big guru and I'm a big teacher and, others are below me and I'm giving them some great knowledge and they have to respect me and all. I just don't have that. And I mean it. I'm not putting up a show like that because you know what, as much as they learn from me, I learn from them. And this is the truth. Just the fact that they ask me questions, and that they engage with me. And that has actually helped me so much. Even as a teacher, I have learned so much. And that is because of people, who are supporting me, even though they are my students, they are supporting me as much as I'm supporting them. So absolutely that, all these bubbles that we create, they are unnecessary in life. Really, they are unnecessary in life. And more grounded you are, the more connected to Ishvara you are, what happens is all this show drops. And that was a huge, huge lesson for me. And even now, I live like that.
Right. So, which brings us to your journey from a student to a teacher. So, how did that come into being? It started right after your 3-year journey, or there was some time in between?
Yeah, that was actually a big surprise because, when the course ended, we were so cut off from the world. Swamiji had to help us, right, to put us back into the world. We didn't know where to go. We didn't know what to do. We had no connection with anything. So he would meet each of the students and he would tell them what they would do. And obviously it was taken for granted that each one would be a teacher because, you've studied for so long. And then he would kind of try to find, depending upon which state that person was, what was the background, he would find a place and he would find some people to support that person initially. So, we were all like very excited that, oh, where is Swamiji going to ask you to go? And people were telling me, oh, he will send you to London or he will send you here and he'll send you there. And when my turn came, Deepak, Swamiji said, go back to work. I said, what? So he says, yeah, you are still very young and you have, dropped out way too early and you have to go back to work. And that was like a huge surprise for me. And I was also feeling that how come everybody else is, now going to be a teacher and I have to go back to work. Then I told Swamiji that, Swamiji, I've totally lost touch with economics. I have no idea what's going on in the world. How am I going to go and take a job again after 3.5-year break? He said, it doesn't matter. You just apply and you see what happens, And so I applied and actually, I don't know how, but in 3 months, my course got over in October 1998, and in February 1999, which was just 3 months after, one of my previous bosses, he called me and he says, if you really want to work, there is a position available and you can apply for it. So I applied for it and I got it. But still, there was so much doubt in my mind because at the UN, we are advisors to the government about their economic policy. And I had no idea what was going on in the world for 3 years. I said, okay, one thing is to get a job, but how am I going to perform? Right? How am I going to actually do justice to, my job? But to my surprise, I really found that Vedanta had changed me. It had changed me. It had given me so much clarity. It had given me a clear mind, and that clarity, that logical clarity and emotional non-interference, it actually allows you to look into anything and deal with it with ease. So that was a huge discovery that I could do my job really well. So, because, it was by then, it was internet age and information is not something which was not available. You type in Google and all the information was available, but it's how you analyze that information, how you present that information, what you make of it. That's what is really important. And Vedanta had given me that clarity and that analytical capacity to actually extract from the information the main points and to present them and to use them for policy making. So I saw that it had really helped me. And also it had helped me in my personal relations. I was not afraid of bosses. I was able to say what I had to say without being offensive or without being aggressive. And everybody started noticing. Everybody started noticing me that I was not only excelling in my work, but I was also good with my human relations. So that's where one of the directors at the UN, he was the head of UNFPA in Bangkok, and he organized. He says during lunchtime, he says, come and give us a little talk on what you studied for 3.5 years, and it was a 45-minute talk on Indian philosophy and 15 minutes question and answer session. So I said, yeah, sure, why not? So, and then when I saw there are all these amazing people with all PhDs from all top schools in the world, and not being the UN, it was not only Indian, right? There were people from there's Pakistan sometimes, Europe, US, Australia, everywhere. and I started presenting Indian philosophy. And I spoke for 45 minutes. And then there was this question and answer session. And everybody started bombarding me with all kinds of questions because they are not devotees or anything. They are professionals and they are great thinkers. So they started bombarding me with all these very difficult questions. And my first reaction was, oh my God, what have I got into now? Then I just composed myself and I said, you know what, I'm not here to convince everybody of, that Vedanta is the final truth or anything. I'm presenting a subject matter. And let me just reply to the best of my ability and, to clarify some of the doubts that they have. So I regained my composure and I replied to them. And at the end, so many of them came up to me and said that this is the most fascinating and stimulating talk that we have heard in a very long time. And they wanted to continue. They said, why don't you do every Thursday during lunchtime little sessions on Indian philosophy? So this is how my teaching journey started, at the UN and, with all the professionals from all around the world. So that was an amazing, it was, by going back to work, I didn't know that my teaching will also start along with, being a full-time professional again.
Right. And just to add on a comment, what also took me by surprise is how sophisticated this all knowledge is, right? So wherever we come from, we have this idea of spirituality and it will be all mostly mumbo jumbo and mostly faith based and this thing. And you will just have to take it on face value that this is written, you have to follow it. But the arguments are simply astonishingly sophisticated. And I think the more people start going into it, and perhaps that was a reaction after your talk, that there is so much to unravel here, and without compromising our logic and reasoning abilities.
Exactly. I think that's what really attracted, because people always thought that spirituality is all about belief. It's about, flying up with some ideas which are unverifiable, and they don't have much kind of value or even respect for spirituality. But when they saw that it was highly analytical in nature and it made you think about it, had very sophisticated methodology, then people were floored. And so many people from Pakistan and Bangladesh and all were coming and they were listening to me with a lot of interest. And they were saying that we are able to understand our thing, right, through what you are explaining. And so it was not like, it's such a universal thought. It is not like you can't even categorize it as a Hindu thought, because it's just talking about universal realities. And that's why it's very appealing. And the approach is also, as you very rightly said, very logical and inquiry based, right, and not just prescriptive, that you must do this or this is how it is. It's not like that. So that's fascinating for many people.
Right. So was it after your talk that Wisdom of Rishis was born, or did that take place later?
After my talk that
Wisdom of Rishis,
the Wisdom of Rishis was a little bit later, because then actually I was still full-time and working, and then initially I was teaching at the UN, during lunchtime. But later on, people were saying, why are you confining it only to the UN? So I started classes in Bangkok. I used to live in Bangkok on weekends. So where all the expatriates community used to come and, they used to study with me. And then I was getting invited at Foreign Correspondents Club where all the journalists were. So I was getting quite to be known in Bangkok. But then my husband said that, why don't we also make ourselves available, to people at large? So that's when he decided to do a website. And, when we first did a website, then my husband Surya said, why don't we advertise a retreat, right? And we do a retreat. I said, nobody knows us. And already people who are in Bangkok, they are coming to us for our classes. Who will come to our retreat? So he says, doesn't matter. We'll advertise in Anekatti, and then we'll see if anybody comes. And we were so surprised. People came from Argentina, people came from Brazil. They didn't know us. Obviously, they know Swamiji, because Swamiji was a very big name in Vedanta. But they also came to us. And I think what I feel, what attracts people, the kind of people who are attracted to us, is that our background is slightly different, from other teachers. I think we have worked abroad, we have lived abroad, we've been professionals, and we don't have this Swami kind of a demeanor, and so we are just normal human beings. And I think there are people who want to just relate to somebody, and not as a authority or anything, but just kind of somebody who can make them understand things in a modern language, in a contemporary world, and understand their lifestyles. So I think those are the kind of people I feel are attracted to us. So we never had any difficulty right from the beginning to attract people. I mean, we were so lucky. We always had, because otherwise Vedanta world is also flooded with so many teachers. There are so many teachers. All of my classmates, we are 50 of us. Swamiji has done 6 courses, 3.5-year courses like that. Then there are other teachers of Vedanta. They have produced so many teachers. So teachers are plenty. And we were thinking that, we are not even Swamis, or we are, just normal people who will come to us. But it has been very, very easy journey. And we have found students who are engaging. Not just somebody who is a devotee and will follow you and listen to you, but those who want to inquire into things. And that has been a huge blessing. So, a wisdom of rishis happened a little bit later, first our teaching journey started.
And usually, Neema, so when people start teaching, they take some portion of their own teacher into their teaching, and then there is an individual tint, individual perspective added onto it. Could you just elaborate a little bit onto your teaching? How much of it is you think is directly brought down from the above, and how much what you have learned and actually implemented?
Yeah, there are one thing that Swamiji always used to tell us, that we come from a teaching tradition, and a lot of care has been taken that there is no deviation from the central vision of Vedanta. So you can't just add your own thing and dilute or distort what is being said, because then you are actually not doing justice to this teaching tradition. So he says that please don't use your creativity in a way that you may end up harming this tradition. Have that 100% integrity that, my job here is to just communicate the ideas of Lord Krishna, right? And not to add my own masala into it, right? Because by adding my own masala, I will only kind of distort it and not keep it as great as it is. So that is a certain commitment to the tradition that he kind of really grilled us with. So that we are very careful. But at the same time, he said that every individual brings their own unique skills, unique talents in communication. You don't deviate from the vision, but how you communicate is something which is your unique style, and don't be afraid of doing that. Don't just copy me, right? So some people, Swamiji was very humorous, and I never can be. So even when he was teaching such fine ideas, he would make it very light, and he would crack jokes and all. So some of the students who were studying with me, towards the end, they were memorizing those jokes and to repeat those jokes to keep the audience entertained. I never did that. No, because that's him, that's not me. Then these are his jokes, they are not my jokes, right? So I can't do that. But I have introduced my style, and my style has 2 things that I think that are introduced by me. One is that I allow people to interact with me during the class. Why? because I really think I've studied in the US, and first time I went to classes at Columbia University, it was so hard for me to talk because we never were allowed to talk. We were just listening and listening and listening. And I had to literally push myself. But I found that that's the first time I started really learning things. It was not passive learning. It was not just listening to people. I was engaging with professors while they were teaching. And now I have introduced that not only after the class, but even during the class, people can ask me a question, or they can add their comments, and we can have a discussion, which still people are not, many people are not used to it. But I see that, and sometimes people tell me that, no, you speak, and then only last 10, 15 minutes are question and answer. But I have seen with my own eyes that how the students who come to me, and those who engage with me, and those who are asking me questions while I'm teaching, and answering my questions while I'm teaching, they have learned so much faster. They have learned so much faster than even myself I have learned. What took me 5 years, 6 years to comprehend, they understand in 1.5 years, 2 years, because they are able to engage with me. I encourage that. And that is my unique style, which my classes are interactive in nature. And the second style, which I think is, I give a lot of day-to-day examples. I have lived life, and I have met many people, and I have seen what they are going through. And of course, I don't reveal the identity, but I talk about, not just stories, real human life dilemmas that people go through without revealing their identity, and how this teaching and these thoughts can help. And I think that also, I think it resonates with people a lot. So these are my unique styles that I have added,
Right. So,
because of my own background. And also I'm a little, I myself had a lot of questions. It's my mind was not like just believing in something and all. And I had hundreds of questions, and those very questions I raised during my teaching. So, and I think that also makes people kind of, not just explain what is, but raise questions and answer. And I think that also helps people a lot. It's there in Bhashyam, but I also do my own raising questions. So this is something that I bring on the table, which is from my own unique experience and personality.
right. No, on the first part of asking questions while you're teaching, I'm sure it doesn't come naturally in India, neither to the student nor to the teacher. It's just not something which we are told, or which was even allowed, actually,
Absolutely.
to be fair. But on the second part, Neema, you said you give examples and you have learned from the students. Are there any common themes emerging from what you have taught? I mean, both in terms of the problem sets as well as the solution sets. Are there any commonalities which you see?
Yeah. See, there are certain things, everybody has a life story. And in every life story, there are certain common things, common traits that people have. The first thing is, that, as you were saying, that most of the people live like a victim, that I am wonderful and somebody else is at fault. Right? And that is a very comfortable vision to live with, because you feel you're so wonderful, but others have been really mean to you, and now you are caught. You're caught in this no-win situation. And I really make them see that there is, first of all, everybody has a free will. So even if you are in that situation, I make them understand that it's not because somebody is doing something and you're caught in the situation. You have chosen to be in this situation. And if you have chosen to be in this situation, then, you still have a choice to get out, right? And also, if you choose to continue to be there, you have to make it as pleasant for you as possible. So find solutions and don't complain. So these are things, that one thing that I have been, teaching people to take responsibility for their life. And unfortunately, the way somehow our karma is taught, many people, I don't know why, they understand it as, oh, everything is as it is meant to be. But I keep telling them that karma is a cause and effect relationship. Certain things that you go through in your life are, of course, due to the past causes, but you're constantly creating new causes, right? And that is based on your free will. And that is going to shape your future. You can't keep talking about the past. The whole purpose of Indian philosophy is not to talk about the past, right? But to actually carve a meaningful life for you by using your free will intelligently, which can actually, lead to a lot of self-growth and also self-knowledge. So this is something that I take a lot of pain to make people understand. The second thing that I think emotions, many people struggle with emotions. And not only they struggle with emotions, but they also struggle with, the relationship with those emotions. So most of the time people think that negative emotions are something that you need to get rid of. So they call fear as negative, anger as negative, sadness as negative, and they only try to get rid of it. So what I keep telling them is, in Bhagavad Gita, there is a wonderful verse where Lord Krishna says, Bhayam cha abhayam aham eva cha. So what does it mean? I'm fear and I'm fearlessness. So what does it mean? Both are me. So that means no emotion can be categorically said as negative. Sometimes fear is also important. Why is it important? Because it will prevent you from, jumping from a higher floor or crossing the road when you see a vehicle coming. So that fear is very necessary for your survival. So you can't categorically label it as negative. It is there for a reason. In that there is Ishvara. But sometimes those fears become what mostly creation of our own mind. We create scenarios. There is no external situation, but we create scenarios and we get caught in that. So that needs to be taken care of. So that means Lord Krishna says that even that abhayam, that you're capable of, right, understanding your own projections, your own superimpositions, which lead you to those emotions, and you're capable of undoing it. But that requires facing the emotion and not dodging the emotion. So this is something that I teach my students not to try to skip their emotional life and to actually face their emotions and not try to avoid their emotional life. This is one thing that I have taught them. And also the third thing that I teach them is that self-image is very important. I had one Swiss guy who came to my retreat in Italy. And he told me, he was listening to Vedanta from somebody. And he, at the end of my session, he says that I was listening to Vedanta because from young age, my parents were always telling me, you're dumb, you're no good. And so I always thought I was a failure. And now Vedanta tells me that, you are the whole, you're Brahman. So it sounded wonderful. So I could counter this feeling that I'm useless or I'm a failure or I'm no good. But I was escaping. So he said, as a result of your seminar, now I see that I cannot bypass this and start thinking that I'm the whole. I have to confront these emotions. I have to look into it and I have to change my story about myself and live from a certain self-image, which is neither a kind of I'm everything nor I'm useless. It is just healthy self-image that is so necessary. So Swamiji always used to tell us that before you understand such a big reality that I'm Brahman, you have to feel certain amount of, self-confidence. And that is something which is required. You can't skip that stage. So these are the things that I teach my students. Yeah.
Yeah. So a couple of things which really struck me when you were telling what you teach. One is there is such a precise and meticulous nature of this thinking, right? So it's not a crude philosophy transmitted in a hammer kind of a manner. There's a delicate unraveling of stuff. And the last point which you mentioned was that, I mean, most of us are not even aware of the baggage which we are carrying.
Absolutely.
Right? It's simply something which we have either pushed under the carpet or we don't want to look at it. And probably that is also where a large part of blaming comes from, because all the looking is outwards and inwards it's all blanked out.
Absolutely. And this is why, we have, Swamiji always used to also tell us that it's not only psychology. We are not talking only about psychology. Otherwise, psychologists can do that job better than us because we are not educated in psychology. But what he says, which I also have observed, that the understanding of Ishvara as order, it helps a lot. Because then, anything that happens in your life is governed. It's not this, somebody is personally trying to teach you lessons or personally trying to punish you. But there is a kind of a impartial law, unbiased law, right? And which is impersonal in the sense that there is no, it is like, when you drop a pen, it is going to fall. And that is law of gravity. Whether I do it or some saint does it or a beggar does it or a millionaire does it, it doesn't distinguish. It is something which applies equally to everyone. So that means there are certain laws like that you can't bypass. And if all of us are governed by those laws, which are infallible in nature, who will you blame? Who will you blame in life? Neither you can blame others, nor you can blame yourself. But you have to use your intelligence to move ahead in life. And this is something which is a huge thing. Because, unless you ask this question, what is the nature of the world in which I'm living? And you answer that question and you see the presence of Ishvara in what you thought was a random world or what you thought was an unfair world. You have to develop trust in the universe. From that trust, the growth comes, So this is why bringing Ishvara in your life for Vedanta becomes critical. Because you make sense of the world, which otherwise, with the data that we have, often we can't make sense. So,
wonderful. This has really been a very enlightening conversation, Neemaji. So before we end, I know you also recently co-authored a book, Finding Meaning Through Bhagavad Gita. Would you like to end with any of a particular shloka as a conclusion?
Yeah. So there is one shloka where Lord Krishna says, Swakarmana tamabhyarcha siddhim vindati madavaha. So what does it mean? So there is this whole thing that we all have this cliche about spirituality, that we leave the world, we kind of, go to the mountains, we skip the world is illusion, world is mithya, you have to transcend the world and go to, this final truth and desirelessness, detachment. All of these are like commonly used in even by the teachers of Vedanta. But really, the teaching is that where you see a problematic world, that's exactly where you have to see Ishvara. And as you begin to see Ishvara, what happens is your actions are what they become an offering to this infallible order of Ishvara. So that means that is a whole different vision with which you live. It's not about leaving everything, but it's about changing your perspective. And only when you begin to see the presence of Ishvara in and through everything, and that is bhakti, right? That is also bhakti. Then bhakti is not that you go to a temple and you offer something, but your karmas become an offering to Ishvara, to the altar of Ishvara, which is an altar of Ishvara is the whole universe. And that when you begin to do that, then you have access to the final reality. And what is this final reality? Truth of Ishvara, which is Brahman, where you and Ishvara have total identity. So these are some of the verses which are gems. I think they are gems because they give you the understanding of what spiritual life is about, which is so different from the cliches with which we live. So
Wonderful. And again, thanks so much, Neema, for coming and taking your time and sharing your learnings. I'm sure this conversation will be very, very useful for anybody who listens to it. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot, Deepak, for inviting me. And you are such a perceptive person, and you yourself have studied Vedanta. So, your questions come from a certain depth. So I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thanks a lot.